Ylva Palm. I am CTO and CPO here at Nordnet Bank. This is our city office and this is one of our rooms for our försäkringsmäklare. Whatever that is called. Insurance brokers, yes, thank you. And I'm not only the CTO and CPO at Nordnet Bank, I'm also hosting something called Stockholm Tech Meetup, which also is a part of this Stockholm Tech events that are happening. And this is the first day we have Stockholm Tech Fest Safari, so this is a new format. And this is something we're trying out. And of course we at Nordnet wanted to jump on this. So we think it's an exciting format. So we'll see after today what we think about this. And the focus of today is AI and machine learning. Because for us at Nordnet, we believe that the future is in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and user experience. So that is why we wanted to hear more, and we have invited some exciting speakers today. We have Patrick from IBM, Lars from Galagai, Jonas from Opti, Anna and Elise from Kelisek, hello, and Joachim from Bofik. So first I'm going to present our AI strategy and our latest product launch, and then we move forward. So basically, Nordnet Bank, it was the first digital bank in Europe actually. But what we come to realize is that what we provided the customers was the tools to basically build their own portfolio and sit in the driver's seat when taking care of their private finances. But when we I started like 1.5 years ago, and when we started looking into data, we realized that our customer actually didn't really always want to sit in the driving seat because they didn't have time, they didn't really always have the knowledge to do that. And we also started to investigate, how do they need to have more advice? And we realized during some research that in Sweden, 16% of the Swedes are seeking for financial advice at their bank. Only 16%. And even worse, of those 16%, 46% is satisfied with the advice they get from the bank. And I kind of assume, but I didn't get numbers on that those 46% of the 16%, which is about 7%, are private banking customers. So what we wanted to do is to use the machines and the technology that actually is available today, and we will see that also from these excellent speakers, the technology that actually is already here to ensure that we can provide all our customers and all customers with excellent financial advice without having to pay for it like we do in private banking. So our first release, we released it I'm actually shadowing the picture. We actually released it for everyone only a week ago. It's been live internally for a couple of months, but it's what we wanted to do was basically a very, very simple advice robot. Basically, a robot that through very simple assessment, just managing your savings for you. We realized that robot advice in all kind is very, it's emerging, of course. It's used for customer service and also start using for financial products. And we believe that we could do it much cheaper than having actual people behind it. And we see that if you look into internationally, we see that especially in US, but Europe is also following after, that more and more capital actually are managed in robo-advised portfolios. The most exponential growth is from Vanguard, which had 17 billion in 2015 and 75 billion in 2016. So in a little over a year, tripling the amount of capital under robo-advice. So we see an exponential growth in this area. And the funny thing is, we actually discussed this in the panel a little bit before, is that what we see also is a shift for the first time in history actually, that we had the Industrial Revolution where one kind of jobs were automated, and we have always been replacing kind of simple jobs with machines in one way or another. But now we see a completely different trend. We see really qualified jobs being replaced by robots, and that is a really interesting challenge. So what we did a very simple algorithm to start with. Basically, we are doing a risk assessment based on a couple of questions. It's like 12 questions to ensure that we truly understand your risk level, how much capital you have, and what you want to save for. And based on these points, we're taking a decision what kind of portfolio you need. And when we know what portfolio you need, we put up that portfolio and manage that completely. So we do all rebalancing and so forth. And during the retrading, we have zero commission during that we fee for the service. So what you get is an ISK account, and the first version we have autogiro, so we have monthly deposits. The minimum amount is 5,000 initially and 500 monthly. And the reason we have a minimum amount is basically because we're using ETFs, and that is because we want to have we want to be able to create a portfolio. Otherwise, it would be very difficult if you have a smaller amount. And we're using ETFs. So that was the first product launch in our Robo product line. We will, of course, look into several other ways of improving both the robo-advice service for savings, but also other robo-advice services for managing your private finances. And as you might have read in the press, we have started a partnership with an American company called Microsoft, which has a cognitive robot called Amelia, which we will release to our customers by the end of this year, for improving the onboarding so that enabling our customers to communicate with us in a real, instead of communicating with a human, basically have a more human-like communication with us through Amelia. And we will start with focusing on onboarding and helping customers select their first saving products. Should I click here? Sure. So this is a little movie about that, I hope. Oh.
Hello and welcome. It's an honor to be with you as we redefine the future of customer experience through cognitive technologies. I will be working at Nordnet together with RoboSafe, helping you become financially smarter. We've been obsessively studying the structure and biology of the human brain so that we can understand how the mind works at a deeper level. My brain is very similar to yours, consisting of many elements. This is not the brain of a chatbot, is it? I can learn from existing conversations, chat logs, and uploaded documents to shape my cognition and logic. This means I can respond with better accuracy, greater understanding, and with less training time. When you tell me something, my episodic memory is activated, and I start searching for dialogues on similar topics as a reference to provide you with optimal service. On top of that, I am able to leverage my analytic memory, like churn prediction or next product to buy, to ensure I take appropriate steps for every customer. I take into account your emotional state, so I can empathize. When I execute a process for a customer, I understand context, so I know when to skip steps or switch between topics. This results in more efficient and more human dialogue. By employing all elements of my brain, I'm able to deliver on the true promise of AI,
So that was just a little clip, a film clip about IPsoft Amelia and our own RoboSafe. And as I said, this is the first launches. I believe that to be able to nail this, which of course everyone more or less is have ambition to do, I think it's very important to start now, and it's very important to start with a very simple use case. And this is our first step towards becoming next generation private finance advisor or manager. So that was it from my end. I saw an excellent speak yesterday about Watson, Patrick, and I'm really looking forward to hear more from you today. Applaud for you. Oh, thank you.
Good.
So should we? Yes. I know that you say at IBM that Watson is more than AI.
Yes.
Can you define that, or is that?
Well, I think we will see it in the presentation, but basically, a lot of people have a preconceived notion of what artificial intelligence is. And I think IBM has chosen to sort of stay a little bit away from that word and focus on cognitive technologies, or cognitive solutions. And the reason for that is because a lot of people have a preconceived notion of the AI inspired with Terminator or Hollywood type dystopian scenarios, or they equate it very quickly with machine learning specifically. And at IBM, we have a much broader, more ambitious agenda to understand what artificial intelligence can be in terms of cognition broadly.
Super interesting.
Okay, so thank you for the invite. I appreciate it. I don't know how many in the room are actually involved in something AI-ish at work, exploring it, evaluating it, reading up on it. Security. Okay, so this I think is rather symptomatic. We see a lot of interest in the market for artificial technologies, not only IBM obviously, but all the big tech giants are pursuing this field. And I think also a lot of innovative, smaller startups are doing really interesting work because it's a vast market for AI applications. So that's that. I'm Patrick Couch. I work with business development at IBM. Predominantly focusing on the industrial sector, so I'm by no means a financial guy. In fact, I'm not even very much of a technical guy either. I'm a humanist at heart and by education. But I've been working with these AI solutions and cognitive stuff at IBM for the past 6 years or so. And I just wanted to, where I was asked to sort of contextualize the AI a little bit, put it into, where are we today, what is actually real, where are we heading, and maybe also where have we been. So I will try and do that. And whenever you're asked to, speak about the future or where you are, touchy, difficult ground, right? Because we're pretty good at talking about where we are, and we have some facilities to looking back. But when we look into the future, things become quite murky. And in the fast-moving world that we are living in now, in the digital domain, the future is moving very, very fast. So it's becoming very difficult to have any sort of strict notion of where we're going. But I hope that this little presentation will give you a feeling for what is possible to pursue, at least in terms of a futuristic ambition that is not that far away. The AI today. This is basically where we are. You saw the Amelia IPsoft chatbot by Nordnet. This is a cognitoy infused with IBM intelligence in order to facilitate learning at schools. There are many different cognitive assistants out there, digital assistants. I'm sure everybody with an iPhone at least, has used Siri to one extent or the other, to some extent. Tried it out, right? So for IBM, that would be an artificial intelligence, a cognitive capability, the speech recognition. You may have used Alexa or the Echo Home or the Google Assistant, or you may have interacted with the Pepper robot or the smaller Now robot. And a lot of the AI stuff happening today is about the human-machine interaction. So if you think of the case that Nordnet is pursuing about customer service, very much spot on where AI is today. Now, if you look back, and if you go back very, very far, and if you use Stanley Kubrick's excellent movie 2001 as a framework for the discussion, you can go all the way back to prehistory and say, okay, it was when the proto-humanoid picked up technology and teamed up with technology that mankind got going. Right or wrong, but anyway, the partnership with technology has certainly been significant for humans, right? However, if you stick with this metaphor, the future will sort of put you there. And if you remember the movie, this is the AI HAL 9000, who has a specific agenda, a specific objective, a certain idea of what it wants to achieve, and it may be in conflict with the human agenda. So there's a classic scene in that movie where our space astronaut hero wants to return from his spacewalk into the ship, and HAL is basically not allowing him back in because he has called it. His judgment is that letting the human guy back into the operating center is a bad idea, so tough luck, you're out. So there's a lot of sort of, in the thinking around AI, a lot of hostility and negativism around that. Now, if you apply a very broad or inclusive historical perspective, you go from teaming up with technology to ushering in the AI future very, very quickly. It's just first one thing and then the other thing, really, on a large perspective. And if you think about it like that, you will, of course, maybe end up with this kind of future outlook. So I don't know if you kept tabs on what Stephen Hawking has been saying about the AI, or Bill Gates for that matter, or Elon Musk. And all of these guys are certainly not stupid people, right? They are pretty clever and they're pretty well versed in the subject. And they have a sort of a slightly worrisome attitude when it comes to where the AI is heading. And of course, I don't know, to talk about the end of mankind, it's very megalomaniacal and big. But I think there's a reason for those types of thoughts to sort of gather momentum. Did you see this in the news? This was in earlier this year. There was a Chinese manufacturing company replacing 90% of their workers with robotics and AI. And the question was, of course, how did it go? So they had 650 human workers. They were putting together mobile phones in this factory. They reduced it to 60 humans, 60 robot arms. How did the company do? Was that a good idea or a bad idea? Well, financially, it was a very good idea. In fact, it was an amazingly good idea. They should have done this ages ago, had the technology been there. And now they're pursuing, cutting the workforce down even further to see if they can swing around their operations with 20 people instead. So, of course, if you have this attitude towards AI and the promise of AI or the implications of AI, you will have a slightly worrisome future outlook. Right? And of course, the question is, what happens to us? What's our purpose in life? And again, if you turn to the movies, you may not have a purpose. You may be superfluous. You can just sit back, have a soft drink, and watch the screen, and don't worry about it too much. But of course, that is not necessarily a good idea, because there is that question of intelligence. And if we leave algorithms to work for themselves, they can go any direction at all. So when Microsoft released one of their chatbots on Twitter, it was very amusing to people outside of Microsoft because it reflected very quickly the user community sentiment. And of course, people understood that this was a chatbot, so they just went to town with it and had fun or had not so much fun with it. Anyway, it showed two things. It showed that unsupervised learning or training of algorithms is probably not a good idea at this point in time for various reasons. And the second thing is it actually works. This chatbot, this algorithm actually situated itself very nicely in a very specific user context and had interesting conversations in this rather unappealing area. The other thing is, of course, the question of taste. Now, machines and technology doesn't really have taste, right? So the same tech can take you very far in very different directions. So electricity, guitar, Are we happy? Are we not so happy? Depends upon taste, right? So what IBM is trying to sort of convey oftentimes is that a lot of the things that we think about artificial intelligence is not necessarily correct. And actually what we are talking about is rather a portfolio of technologies. So you should think about artificial intelligence as a toolbox with a lot of different tools, not a single one-stop shop with an agenda that can lock the pad or doors and not let you back into the spaceship. So when it comes to IBM, IBM's AI is Watson, or at least that's our brand. And the big splash that IBM made with artificial intelligence was in 2011 when we beat the Jeopardy guys. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So IBM made a lot of hay of this in the market, in the news, right? Because it was quite the feat. And this, of course, builds upon these grand challenges that IBM has posed itself throughout history. In the 60s, we were supposed to put a man on the moon. IBM said, that's pretty complicated. Let's try and figure that out. And we did. Same with the chess playing. You know, how do you beat Kasparov at chess? I don't know. Let's figure this out. And we did. And the question here was, okay, how do we create a system in artificial intelligence that understands language and can react in it very quickly, not by having a lot of information access necessarily, but being able to process and understand that in a different way. And it was quite successful. But that was in 2011. And all of that stuff that was required to create a successful Jeopardy win AI is these 5 technologies. And now it has just mushroomed. And this is not just true for IBM, Microsoft, Google, everybody's just running with the AI technologies, right? But they are specific capabilities. It's not that one box of the AI box and then you take one thing out and it fits everything. It's really very different. So understanding language, a specific language, is quite different from how to understand images. And it's very different from the capability of ranking various hypotheses. So you need to understand what your use case is. So that was the future in terms, or the past in terms of IBM. But today, of course, you have Watson-type AIs all over the place. So for instance, Watson does work embodied in the Pepper robot as a Hilton concierge and interacts with clients. It works as a lawyer, or a research aid to lawyers. It works as a teaching assistant. And what these have in common is basically, in these cases as well, it helps aviation mechanics to figure out what's wrong with airplanes. It helps expert case management in the system or in companies. So for instance, if you have an aging workforce, you can make sure that you understand their expertise and you can transmit that to other workers. Or you can help the cancer doctor with his diagnosis. All of these capabilities are various ways of having AI supply expertise support. It's basically an advisory type role. Same as the advisory of how to invest my money.
Maintenance records and performance data suggest replacing capacitor C4.
Not bad. What's with the coffee maker?
Sorry, we are not on speaking terms.
So 2 things here with this little advertisement. One is, of course, it shows that you can train a system on any domain, but it's domain specific, right? So if you train Watson on understanding an airplane, it will understand the airplane or the financial service advice you want to provide. It won't learn other systems. The coffee machine will be a complete mystery. The other thing is, it will actually be possible to interact quite nicely, as you saw with the Microsoft case as well, with these artificial intelligences using human language, which is quite different from the traditional way of interacting with information systems. You type in your question, or you have to use your hands. So we'll skip these other 2. All right. So then the question becomes, of course, where is the future heading, and where do we want to go with these technologies? And when IBM views the future, we're thinking, okay, so there's probably a lot of innovative people out there, and there are probably people that know a lot of different things that we have no clue about. So what should we do? Well, let's team up. So IBM has an idea of, okay, so if humans are good at certain things, then surely tech is good at other things. And if we can combine these two, we can probably achieve great things. So for instance, people do have morals, good or bad, but they have them. Machines not necessarily so. Machines never really tire. They can do a repetitive task quite a lot of times. Like if you want to figure out some of these patterns and act upon them, you need to sift through a lot of data. And technology like Watson can read 800 million pages a second and understand it. So of course, if you put that capability to work in a legal context, in a financial context, you can expand a lot of expertise, difficult to achieve with only humans. So IBM's take on this is really, we want tech and humans to team up, and we want Watson and the AI technologies to be viewed as an invitation to a partnership. And through that partnership, great things can be achieved. Not necessarily this. You may have a different business goal. It may not be to save the galaxy and marry the princess, but anyway, it's something that you want to achieve. So we are saying, okay, so maybe you work with tax law. Are we going to sift through the entire US tax law and all the current changes ongoing? How can a service technician be in a million places at one time? Well, if he's really good at what he does and he trains the system, that information and that system can be made available to colleagues. All of a sudden you have a greater reach. If you're a developer, you can use it for your reach as well. We mentioned the medical doctor. And all of this is all about you having the vision, the ambition, the idea of taking this someplace. And a company like IBM or one of the other tech giants providing you the AI capabilities that you need to get this at scale and at speed. So instead of this sort of laid back, Wall-E type future where we would sit, drop soft drinks and have the machine play out the world and life for us, IBM I think tends to side with Marshall McLuhan saying that the age of automation is going to be the age of do-it-yourself. And I think if you were at Stockholm Tech Fest yesterday and saw all the interesting startups out there, you see that this is probably true. There will not be less work through the adoption of AI technologies. There will be more, but it will be quite different, for sure. So that's what I want to leave you with. So that's all for me. I hope we have time for questions and so on.
Question on the morals. Just, you raise it, and it's probably, hopefully not a question for anyone in this room, because anyone in this room is probably smart enough to understand what you just said. But for those people who are in manual jobs, as I said today, or who don't have the ability to think 3, 4, 5 steps ahead, what is their world like?
Well, okay, so I think that historically, it has always been a bad idea not to embrace change. So I think historically, when people have sort of lost jobs or when things have gone bad, is when we haven't adapted to inevitabilities. So for instance, I remember years ago when the music industry was up in arms over Napster, and then this digital streaming thing was just the end of the musician and the creative artist and what happened. Really what it was about was distribution channels and exposure rights in stores. It was just about changing the business model and adopting to the inevitability of the technology change that was required. And now we have more music media produced than ever before. So there are more musicians, more people working in entertainment than before. And I think this is true of basically all the various domains. But you're right, you have to adopt change in order to sort of not.
Well, I was actually asking you for a prediction of what if your job today is a dental assistant or something like that, or that can be that is in those first wave of jobs that are going to be crushed by AI. Where does your future look if they're not the sort of person who's going to be adept enough to reskill themselves, so they're sitting back actually trying to work out how to do redesign dentistry?
Well, my personal view is that I do believe that what we call higher qualification jobs, the more intellectual demanding jobs, those will be the ones in jeopardy more so than traditional body manual type work, simply because the cost of matter, the cost of embodying artificial intelligence in robots is more costly than just running an algorithm on in a digital landscape. So I think those people should be more concerned than, say, less educated.
Yeah, I would like to just make a comment, because all innovation and new technology decrease the poverty in the world, and therefore it becomes a favor to the a low level or hard, where it's hard to make it out, to find out whatever it is. Actually, it's coming faster to that group in the whole world. So they are going to get this new technology much faster than we have in this room, actually, because it's a new technology that actually increases the poverty in the world, as it said as we are in network age today. That's my comment.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And there's certainly a lot of frog leaping going on, right? I mean, we don't put down a lot of cables to secure mobile phone traffic in Africa. I mean, we do it wirelessly from the start, cheaply.
I think it's a very interesting question. What will happen with I mean, what will we work with in the future? And I think that if our ancestors knew that we weren't going to work as farmers or hunters like thousands of years ago, they would probably think, my God, what would they work with? And I assume that the future is such that we will make up jobs we think is really, really important, that we're doing something that is doesn't really mean anything to us today, something more abstract, I guess. Any
Yeah, I'm curious to know how you, as IBM, approach this when you have a job coming up there. Somebody asks you for help, like a factory in China or whatever. What's your approach? What's your method? How do you interact to politicians and all the people in this area that probably are concerned if they maybe not right, but they see there will be change? Well, do you have a system for that? How you sell these services? And
well, basically, the overall approach is, optimizing an existing business is never a bad idea.
no,
That's basically our sort of approach. And if you have issues with that, you may have issues with, ways of implementing that optimization, and it may put pressure on, current agreements with worker unions and all the different things. But I wouldn't say that there's a more thought through strategy for IBM globally in terms of how to mitigate that. I think we sort of see it as an inevitability, and that we are trying to position these AI capabilities as something that can empower you. So for instance, and I think this is true generally of the market, a lot of the tech giants are offering these AI capabilities as microservices, basically as APIs that you can call, right? So they become easily consumable and not very expensive to sort of explore. And I think that democratizes the capabilities. So I think it's more about, finding ways of making it possible for people to embrace these technologies than saying, well, whoa, wait, stop, time out, we need to regulate this and figure out what's going to happen to the current job things.
comments from the panel on this? What do you see?
This is, of course, a discussion that always follows a debate over AI and automation. And something that often comes up is the topic of what is typically referred to as citizen's salary or citizen pay. What will you do with all of these people that will actually de facto become redundant because it's already starting to happen. And maybe, people are discussing basically two aspects of this. Most economists would say that citizen pay or citizen salary doesn't work if it is unconditioned. But maybe in the future we'll see some kind of conditioned citizen salary, meaning that if you go to a home for the elderly and read a book, maybe that will merit some kind of compensation or pay, something like that.
Or a robot read the book and you become a YouTuber.
Yeah, something like that. It's a very serious debate and something that you have to think about.
It's very complex.
Yeah, I'm very much on the same note there. And I also become redundant by what definition? By many definitions, I'm redundant because I don't have an employment at a normal company. I run my own company. And perhaps I mean, why do we assume that 90-something or a high percent of employment is natural? Why can't it be that? Why do we assume that unemployment means poverty? A typical example when it doesn't do that is schooling. Why can't we have 70% of employment and 30% of ongoing schooling, as an example? So I think there are many different ways. What we fundamentally need to do is change what we see as redundant, what we see as useful in society, what we see as employment.
And on that note, I think...
And we see that a little bit, right? I mean, Stockholm Tech Fest, we have, I mean, more and more entrepreneurs in Stockholm taking, you know, their own justice in their house. And I happen to know that not all of them make a hell of a lot of money. They are working very hard for basically nothing the first years. So,
no, but I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's very telling the example that you make, because what artificial intelligence will force us to become really is to be more human. So the unique value that we can always bring to the table is our humanness. And then it becomes a question, okay, what does that mean? Well, it means those qualities that are difficult to AIify, if you will. How do you digitize care? You know, the example that you brought, you know, an elderly person wanting somebody there to share an experience of, you know, old age. How do you digitize that, and how do you provide that as a service? You don't bring in Cognitoy. You don't bring in Pepper saying, oh, hello. You don't do that. You sit with the person, and you're a decent human being. And I think there are many different ways that decency and that humanness can be made into a rationale for you know, a program to roll out in order to sort of counteract some of the efficiency aspects of the AI. But I completely agree that we need to raise our vision and ambition way, way up in order to see what's possible in terms of how we could live our life. 40 hours work week, who wants that anyway?
Would you say that that also is sort of a generation shift? What would happen once we have AI-defined a lot of things?
Yes, I would. I would certainly say that the kids today, the younger guys, girls, you know, they don't think like we do, and we don't think like our parents did. You know, our parents perhaps tended to have, you know, one employer for 40 years and then receive a gold watch, and you know, if you didn't have that 40-year-old employment contract, you were in jeopardy for something, right? And now you have guys that are, I'm self-employed, I'm fine. So it is very much a generation question, I'd say.
I think, I mean, what we see is our kids, the digi-natives, but then we will have the AI natives, I mean, like one generation further ahead. So, I mean, a lot of things will happen. I saw some hands.
From a technology point of view, this is not, it's been around for a while, the capability of doing AI like this, like Watson. So what's holding it back? And the second question is that, how close are we to the S-curve when everything is going to be so much commodity, so we see it all over the place?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I think the reason why it's happening now is because some of the points, by the way, that the guy over at Amazon pointed out yesterday at Stockholm Tech Fest, which is like we're spot on, right? The computing power that we can now harness, the cloud, the cost of hardware, the availability of data, the fact that we have digitized, all of these come together to sort of really push this through. And that's why we're seeing this acceleration, and also this, you know, we're on the top of the hype curve with Gartner now, AI. But I think really, you know, the reason is because a lot of factors have come together. And I think what is really, I don't think there's anything stopping, you know, the inevitability of the continued acceleration. I think, you know, Stockholm Tech Fest showed evidently that the startup community has embraced AI, and they are putting AI to work in everything. Food tech, green tech, you name it, you know, we're AI-ifying everything. So I think it's not, there are no hurdles. It's just, you know, work that needs to be worked through. But there will certainly come, as in all change management processes, the question of how to get the user community to adopt the change, because it will force change, and not everybody's super excited to change. Some are pretty relaxed or happy with not change, and that will be something to overcome for sure.
Any comments on the panel? What do you think? When will we see this as AI as commodity in finance, for example, or mortgage handling?
Yeah, I mean, we use AI in different ways, especially in amortization. fix and floating and cooperation and stuff like that. But I have a question regarding, I was spoken with Chalmers University professor in mathematics about level of the AI. I mean, what's said that the human's knowledge is, I mean, the highest level we can come up to. I mean, it could be even further potential for the AI. Are you afraid, like Elon Musk and
No, I'm not. Probably I'm not clever enough to be afraid. I don't know. Could be. I'm an optimistic guy. But I think I forget his name now. But this well-known head of engineering at Google, he came up with this prediction that but the singularity will happen within our lifetime, 12 years or something. And what he meant by that is, when do we have an AI technology clever enough to figure out another more clever AI technology? And something strange happens. And he says, it's just around the corner. Now, I don't think that's around the corner. I think there are enormous technical challenges for that. At the same time, I'm completely humble in front of the fact that I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen at all. And I think that's why it's so exciting, right? So I think if you adopt a less futuristic ambition and you rein it in and you say, okay, let's work with the 2 years, the 3 years, then I think you have a pretty good possibility of navigating very clearly, because there are certain inevitabilities. Like you say, the use of AI technology will become ubiquitous. It will just be all over the place. But it's not that now, so there's work to implement that. So everybody just roll up their sleeves and go to work.
So what do you think about the politicians' role in this? Do you think they will mess up, or do you think they will be listening in and trying to understand and sort of make it happening?
Well, really what I think is politicians will be made redundant. And we will all become politicians in some sense, right? I think the segment of one will certainly apply to political involvement as well. I think there's no reason for us to have a proxy like the parties or the electorate. Look at the US, that didn't work so well, did it? No. So I think we are just in for a complete remake of the whole political system, or the way we exercise our right to have a say in what's going on, at least 1/10 of a billion globally.
In terms of business model, if we're let's say we're a fintech or health tech or whatever, we're business people and we understand our industry. Are you able to go and buy AI in a box? Because like I see my thing and I can see how I want AI to apply to that, but I don't know how to manage the AI people. Do I have to go and recruit someone? Like I want the equivalent of a web hosting service. I don't want to have my own computers. Are there those sort of business models there that?
Yeah, so I would say there will certainly be people that are pushing or plugging the one-stop shop, come here and we'll sort it out for you. I don't think that's a viable way forward. I think to be a responsible company today, you need to have this. You have to have control over the AI and the digital strategy, right? So you need to own that process. At the same time, you do need to team up. You won't be able to figure this out yourself. So if you team up with IBM or somebody else, doesn't matter, but you need that support. However, what I think is interesting is a lot of the commercial models around these capabilities are, as I mentioned, instantiating these as microservices that you pay for as you consume them. So that means then that tech in itself doesn't need to be a cost. It can be related to a value that you see, and then you can team up with somebody who realizes that value with you in a traditional consultancy type partnership. But I think really there's no real financial hurdle, because the first step into exploring this is basic non-existence, freeware all over the place. Doesn't matter if you go to Amazon, Google, ourselves, you can sort of try things out. But more importantly, you need to have an idea of what capabilities you're pursuing. What is it that you want to achieve? Because, as I said earlier, the AI as a name, as a taxonomy, is just a very big word, but really it contains so many different things. So if you just can figure out what it is that you want to achieve, have a more happy customer support, or have a greater optimized something business process, then you can formulate that, and then you can see, okay, what within this larger AI toolbox can you make use of to achieve that? But no, I wouldn't say there's a one-stop shop. The AI will fix it.
So, thank you very much again,
you.
Patrick. Now it's time for Lars from Gather.
I only have this slide.
Oh, you only have one slide. see this one. So, Lars, can you just tell us a little bit about GavaGuy? I don't think everyone, you're not as well known as IBM, at least.
No, exactly. I always make
Not
that
to-
joke.
not-
You
not
know,
to insult
when we come to
anyone, but-
people like Google and Facebook and IBM and others, we just say, please relax, we haven't heard about you either. So, I will tell you the story about GavaGuy very, very quickly, and then I will give some very concrete use cases from the
Can you
finance
please
industry.
speak up? Louder?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is that better? GavaGuy is a spin-off from the Swedish Institute of Computer Science, which is a prominent research institution. And SIX, as it's called, SIX was one of 6 labs globally that in the 90s took part in a huge research program sponsored by Japan. It was called Real World Intelligence, and it was about creating the computers for the future. So it was extremely futuristic and explorative. So this project ran for 10 years. It was $600 million US. And in this position, SIX, of course, had the opportunity to go totally bananas. So they hired people people from NASA in the US, and they started exploring. And this lab, after these 10 years, they had something really, really interesting and promising. And in 2010, this was spun off from SIX, and we took in some money from family and friends, and we hired a team for doing an industrial implementation of this research. So the scientists and some new coders were employed, and since then we have been building the system for the last 6.5, 7 years. So it's language technology, it's about natural language processing, and it's about natural language understanding. And we just came out with this machine or this base technology, which is basically a number of language brains that learn language exactly like a human being. So it's what we have today is actually the truest or closest representation of real AI. It's truly unsupervised. It's not built on training, but on learning. And it's unique in several aspects. It learns incrementally on the fly from observed language usage without any kind of retrain or redeploy cycle. It's super scalable, and it's really fast and efficient. And it does some other things that are truly unique that no one else does. It learns both unigrams, so single terms, and n-grams, i.e. multi-terms expressions on the fly. And it understands language better than the average college student in each language. And on top of this, we have just recently launched our first product, which is for insights from text or voice-to-text data. And we basically attack this whole segment, which is customer interactions, B2C and B2B, of which there is approximately 1.5 billion generated daily in the world. So that is what we're doing, and I will give you some examples, but I will also talk generally about the cases and trends in the industry. And I must tie back to the previous presentation and say that over the last, right now everybody's talking about AI. It used to be big data, and now it's AI, etc. You have these hype cycles, and all these AI presentations, they used to have this picture of the Terminator. Basically this humanoid Terminator that we create like a Frankenstein, and then it will turn against us and try to destroy us. And that, of course, presupposes that it has a will and that it's very strong-willed. And when Elon Musk and others talk about this, a lot of people frown about it. But what we're talking about here is basically systems that would be something beyond what we have today, so that these strong-willed systems don't exist yet. But of course, you can create a system that is sort of goal-based. So if, depending on what the goal is and how the deep reasoning of this machine is, and if you give it ultimate powers, let's say to launch rockets or whatever, it may say, just as this HAL 9000, that in order to I work as a machine for the betterness of humanity, And for the betterness of all humanity, I must bomb that country now, where there is a virus outbreak. These are the kinds of sort of dystopic themes that people are talking about. We don't have strong-willed machines yet. Then we talk about big data. Big data was totally overhyped, and then it comes down to the sort of the trough of disillusion, but it will over-deliver on its hype. The bulk of all data is unstructured, and traditional computers, they have only been good at dealing with data that comes in rows and columns. But how do you do with pictures and language, like text? And there is more in data volumes, there's significantly more language data than in images. So the bulk of all this data is unstructured. And it's not until now that we're starting to be able to deal with this sort of data. So this hype about big data was a little bit premature. Now we have these machines that understand. And I'm convinced that now we will see that big data will basically over-deliver on its hype. But why are we talking about AI right now? It's because of this development over the last 8 to 10 years, where we see great advantages. I mean, now everybody wants to be a data scientist. And it's because we have a confluence of several trends. We have much greater data volumes. So the amount of data is doubling in the world at a rate of approximately 24 months, the bulk of which is unstructured. That data, of course, contains a lot of vital information that you want to extract in a very efficient way, and you want to do it just in time. Then you have the usage of mobile phones, etc. And people are highly productive, chatting and texting and producing stuff. So they also generate a lot of data, and they interact with the world in a new way. And then you have this last bit that computers now, it's cheaper. You can analyze unstructured data in a very sort of efficient way. And now when we look at these applications, if you go to, for instance, the banking industry, banks have traditionally been extremely slow to adopt to the new world. They talk about digitization and agility and things like that, and many banks set up innovation labs, but they're not at all very active in this space in general. They're very far behind. And if you look at truly digital companies like Spotify and Tinder, etc., they have this customer in the center of their business model and of their core system that they use, and they tweak this in very short product cycles, down to 14 days. And they analyze, of course, hundreds of millions of interactions every day to stay one step ahead of their clients. And it's bizarre because, you know, in the banking world, which is, I mean, the banking world is special because it has its own barriers, etc. You risk weights. It's rather complicated from a compliance point of view to become a bank, as you have these local oligopolies. So, and also you have a trend now that has been coinciding with this development of AI, where actually the operating environment for banks globally has been extremely benign. But now something is happening here because the regulatory cost. And when they look at other industries, they have this stress. So now there's the fear of, we call it the fear of the worry that they need to catch up really quickly. So what do banks do typically? A big bank, they will launch a super big project. They will start getting in the consultants. They will start building their data lakes. They will have pre-studies that will cost them hundreds of millions, etc. And they often fail. And then they get scared. Someone gets fired, and then they start again. The ones we see that really succeed, that's how it is. The ones we see that really succeed are the ones that have very, very specific problems. They have a problem that they want to solve in a more efficient way. And they do that by having people with some knowledge of machine learning, and they put them into the production team, or almost in the front office, and say, we want to increase the conversion rate of this, let's say, a campaign regarding this credit product or whatever it is that comes 4 times a year to our retail or private banking segment. And they start working with that. It's not very advanced. And they see then that the conversion rate goes straight up. And that, of course, becomes a shining example for management. They say, we're digitized and we're agile, and then they try to repeat it again and again and again. And then, when they have this working in several instances,
they said, now maybe it's time to contact a big consultancy firm and an integrator and build something with our whole system. So that's the proper way to go about it, according to my experience. What we are doing now we just launched this product. What we are doing in the banking space, it's several things. We have one big bank where we give them efficiency gains in excess of 99%. So one example would be a process that has to do with customer interactions, where they constantly take in, I don't know how many it is, but it's huge amounts they take in from their clients. They send messages to them. How did you experience your visit to the bank or to the branch office? And people just text. Free text, just as they're typing. They're sitting on the bus, they get this, and people are used to doing this. They're right, this was good and this was bad, etc. Rafts of this, vast amounts. They used to take samples of this and do it manually. It took 2 people, 5 weeks, and it was recurring on a 4-week cycle. Now they do it in less than 5 minutes with a higher quality output. And the good thing with that is also that from this analysis, they can increase the margin on some of these clients that they detect in the analysis with up to 40%. So distribution, customer-centric, knowing your clients, which is now like a mantra in every business. But how has it been in the finance business? Know your client. The finance industry is the only industry I know of where the legislator has to step in and say, you must know your client or we'll give you a fine, right? So that is weird from 2 points of view. First of all, the lost opportunity. The lost opportunity, the lost business opportunity, the increased margins, etc. That's one thing. The other thing is, of course, the reputation risk and all of that. That is something that you need to monitor yourself. We see that banks can, via advanced insight analytics, decrease their own cost of capital by what is called intelligence, or business analytics, or just insights, monitoring all their relevant counterparts. So we have distribution, and then we have something very interesting in the production. And in the production, we have something like alpha generation. One thing is to putting products together, and I will talk a bit more about that. The other thing is what is typically referred to as predictive analytics. Predictive analytics in the financial space exploded a few years back with what is called high-frequency trading. So when it was possible, with the cost of processing, to look at every little tick generated at some major exchanges, analyzing those in real time and trade on it, that of course deflated the cost of doing business. But that box got very crowded and was only looking at structured data. Now people are looking at unstructured data, such as language data. And the most successful hedge fund in the world, which is Renaissance Technologies, it so happens that their team and founders, they have consistently been the best hedge fund in the world. Their core team, they're language technologists, computer linguists, and coders that left NSA to set up this fantastic hedge fund. And I know one very recent test that is super interesting. 6 years ago, a machine that only reads text on the net started taking fictitious positions on the VIX future. Now, 6 years later, and 260 trades later, that fictitious portfolio is up by 1,000x. So if you put in $1,000, you now have 1 million in 6 years. And that is, that is not only the only proof of alpha we see in this space, but it's something that is truly transformative. So far, it's too much of a black box for most asset management organizations to run with, but it's where we are heading. Now, I want to say 2 words about, first, Chatbots. If you've ever tried to talk to a chatbot, you will see, as we heard already, that if you go slightly outside the domain on which this bot has been trained, it will break down. If you use a term, a combination of terms that it hasn't heard, it will break down. And a bot, what is a bot? A conversational solution is basically just a loop of selection. So someone expresses this intent, you go there, and you ask questions, and then you have like a little tree and loops, etc. So it's fairly uncomplicated. The only complication is understanding what people are talking about when they're talking to the chatbot. And this is called intent and intent detection. We have recently supplied our technology to a firm that is creating the next generation chatbot that is more of a general purpose. So if you have a narrow field, you can use this narrow training field, narrow AI, but you cannot move from something that is being a training model that is worked on training data. You cannot expand it to be general. But a general approach, from a general approach, you can go to the specific. And this is very important to remember if you ever talk to someone about chatbots. You can go from the general to the specific, but not vice versa. You cannot go from training to learning.
Why is that? Sorry.
Because these models, they're based on, the best bots that you have today, they are trained on a very, very specific field. Someone talks about something else, you will encounter what is known as the out-of-vocabulary problem. And when you talk about big data, this is typically one of the V's, variability. None of the others are a problem. Volume and velocity, that's not a problem. The extreme variability of natural language is something that no one of the big ones have broken them yet. So this is happening now, and this is quite transformative. This is the space we are in. So that's why we're having a little bit of success now. But we've been investing 100 million krona over the last 7 years with this team. We hired the architect of the system at the Swedish police and of NASDAQ and some other coders in building this. And it kind of works. So our machine picks up on the fly. So if our language brains learn by themselves incrementally without any this is important, without the retrain, redeploy cycle. So it's computationally extremely efficient. They will just have a lot of streaming data around the clock from data suppliers. So they will read on some chat forum in New Zealand. Someone is texting to someone else. Fantasy word, Kluk, Q-L-U-Q. Kluk was angry, Kluk wasn't wagging his tail. Kluk bit Lisa in the finger, we're taking Kluk to the vet tomorrow, whatever. Our machine will suppose that Kluk is the proper name of the dog. So we don't observe Kluk, put it in some kind of model, like a vector model, and then retrain and say that Kluk now belongs to the concept of proper names of dogs. It does that by itself. And another aspect of this is, of course, when we look at hotel reviews, our machine understands that free weights belong to the gym, free pastries belong to something else. I mean, it's different things. But if you look at the systems today, they don't work like that. So free is free. We look at things that are free. It's word by word. And it doesn't yield a good result. So that is about chatbots generally. And now, what's the takeaway from this? The takeaway is that within, let's say, 3 to 5 years, we will see chatbots that are a completely different level of understanding than we see now. So we got this intent in this robot from 30 to 80%, which is massive. And that's the general purpose robot. It's for psychotherapy. So it's like a cognitive therapy in your pocket on the mobile. It hasn't been launched yet. And we do this in 45 languages. The other thing I want to mention is robo-advisory, because we talked about robo-advisory. Robo-advisory will also be something that is huge. It will be tremendously huge. There are a couple of small things. I mean, it's already a success at some instances. We've seen that in Singapore and in the US. There are some small things that need to be fixed. And when they are fixed, this will completely take over with one little caveat. You know that this benign trend that we've seen for the last 8-9 years has, in terms of technological development, has coincided then with this benign trading environment where everything's just going up, and you have this constant clamor for cheap credit, etc., and the stock markets just keep moving up. So some people say it's an asset bubble, but we have very, very good market conditions. But in the wake of every major market correction, there are massive costs for all banks because they need to settle loads and loads of claims for alleged unsuitable advice, breaches against the fiduciary duties. And how does that pan out? Well, it's a total lottery, because when it goes, or if it goes, which it seldom does, to a court of general jurisdiction, that court will be prone to a very, very common bias called hindsight bias. What seemed like a very good idea then, medium risk with this investment horizon, after the market crashed, seemed crazy. How can you do that? How can you do that at that time? Like in 2009, people going, well, at the end of 2007, I went in and they said, like, have 60% in S&P 500. Then you have a market correction of almost 50%, and people get disappointed, and the judge will rule in favor of the claimant. So you have a lot of these settlements, and who is actually taking up the cost for all of this uncertainty? Well, it's the end client, it's the consumer. But when we have systems in place, and there are solutions on the way out, that actually can provide satisfactory, sufficient evidence to support the idea that at the time the advice was given, it was suitable to the best of everyone's knowledge at that time. So it's incontestable. That will be of huge value for the banks. That problem is solved. Solutions are coming out. The other thing, of course, is that in a normal banking situation, if you go in and let's say you have a custody account, you're saving money, or you have a pensions account, then you want to invest. I want to sell my Intel, I want to buy some Microsoft, I want to do this and that, and this is a 2-year punt, and people have different investment horizons. And all the portfolio models of today, they are based on the notion of single horizon. And in real life, people are not single horizon. So you need a concept, and that also can be derived from artificial intelligence, and it will be a huge boost for robo-advisors. You will have a model that can estimate strategy risk. Strategy risk instead of just risk in the underlying asset. How much time do we have?
I think we are about to run out of time. What would you say about model risk and herding? So if you're doing strategy advice and you're using the same data and the same type of models, and you're dealing with that, there are lots of clients who will get herding.
Very good question. The question was about herding. And basically, when people are crowding into one trade that has been advised, etc. But we see that already today. But another related question is, what happens if you have a trading model that works on sentiment data, let's say from like these guys are using, and then they have a new buy signal, and more people are using the same kind of sentiment data. So some people say it can cancel itself out, but it's not a tax arbitrage. That is an eternal feedback loop that will create new prices and new opportunities. So it's a dynamic system. So unlike a tax arbitrage, it will not cancel itself out. Yeah, I'm ready to take any questions.
General question, like American really big bank, Nordnet is, no offense, I mean you're a big bank, but how do you stand to, yeah, I mean, if you take like, say that they have a cooperation, a few of them, and they have massive resources, and they can spot that Swedish banks, for example, are using the same fundamentals, and then they abuse that to corrupt the fundamentals so that you buy and they sell. How do you like work with anti-defense and things like that?
What do you mean? When you try to manipulate by pushing
Well,
data out into open sources in order to influence? Is that the?
Yeah, they can influence you to make a bad decision, right?
But I mean, what kind of data would you influence? As an example.
Right. Well, they can give you they can push down prices on a specific resource. You see, oh, this resource is going down, and they have spotted that when you see that these resources go down, you do this.
But then they'd have to know who the counterparty was, and if you depends upon your venue.
People are, I mean, it's an old problem. I mean, people in the financial markets, they're always buyers and sellers. People try to second guess each other, and of course, market manipulation is against the law. But and of course, you can try to manipulate via prices, of course. And there are people that work around the clock to try to. They use systems to try to detect that, of course. So I mean, that's one of the few areas actually where you have advanced analytics that have been going on for decades are within the financial sector are in two areas. One is for different kinds of fraud detection, market we call it market surveillance and things like that. You have sophisticated tools that typically are advanced, what we used to call pattern recognition, but now is bordering to deep learning, machine learning. And the other area is within the payment system and credit cards. So like the Visas and the MasterCards or the Amexes, they have been using this forever. Banks even use that, of course. But it's not considered to be a problematic area. It's considered more or less solved.
One last question.
You started saying something I didn't quite understand about strategic versus asset class. I don't know, expectation or trend, or you saying something towards the end here that you broke up.
I can't remember. I've been talking too much, but give me a clue. Strategic.
It's a strategic risk.
It was about now thinking horizon.
Okay, the risk in the strategy. Okay, all right. Okay, when you look at, if you look at portfolio theory, right? Portfolio theory is a theory. People often just flip through that, in school, capital market theory, portfolio theory, and say that some of these assumptions, the basic postulates for portfolio theory, are false and easily falsified. One such postulate is that assets with the same expected return should have the same risk and vice versa. Of course, that is false. And you can read that in your textbook. Most people, however, forget that. So you have this little triad. Expected return, risk, often measured in standard deviation of variance or whatever, and time. So what is the highest risk? Is it 16% annualized daily standard deviation, or is it 15%? Yes, 16% of course. But what is the higher risk strategy? Is it to invest at 15% standard deviation over 3 months, or is it to invest at 16% standard deviation over 30 years? Which is the highest risk strategy? That, of course, makes you think. And how can you figure out, and how can you grade that, and how can you quantify that? Yes, you can, of course, do that with the help of AI. That is a giant leap forward.
Super interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
So now it's time for some other focus on finance and AI.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Great. So I'm gonna go on a similar topic as we've been on to so far, actually. And I'm gonna warn you that in the very start it may seem a bit pessimistic, but that's not at all the case. Rather, I'm extremely bullish when it comes to what we today call AI. but I'm also very conscious that we actually make this a trend which sticks and that we're able to do something out of it. Go back to the hypercurve, etc. So I want us to embrace the hybrid, basically. My background is I'm actually an engineer compared to many people from finance here. So today I'm the CEO and co-founder for a company called Opti. And what we do is essentially trying to show which funds that are worth their price and which mutual funds which are not. And why we do it is essentially going back to, well, some of us were very unsatisfied customers with the big banks. And we got quite fed up actually with sitting with one of the big banks, getting an advice saying, okay, we want you to have the best funds in the world, and therefore you should only buy our brand funds. Then of course that makes you ask, okay, do you make the best funds in the world, or is there something else at play here? So essentially we want to take a step back and give independent, highly technology-assisted financial advice. And my background is actually completely similar but completely different, where I spent 7 years building algorithms for automatic video editing before. So very different. Input all the content, and we will generate the video which will be most interesting for you to upload to Facebook next Friday, as an example. So that's what we do today. But before we start, so we have sort of slightly dwelled on what is AI, what is more narrow application of AI, and I think it's quite useful actually to sort of break down this this term. So we talk about AI, but if we take one step back, perhaps we should divide it into AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is often sort of referred to as when a computer can do most things that an individual can do better, or at least as good as the individual. And then we have ANI, artificial narrow intelligence, which rather is, okay, if we take something way, way, way smaller, when can a computer actually do this narrow thing at least as good or better as a computer or as a human? And many of the things that we've talked about here obviously concerns ANI. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that there's a handful of companies in the world actually going seriously on the AGI trajectory.
Most, I would certainly agree. Most action is happening here.
Yeah.
The applicability of the AI stuff is happening. Some interesting stuff is being done there as well, but it's in its infancy.
Yeah. So keywords here is, well, we have artificial always, but also narrow and yet again intelligence. And then what is intelligence? And I don't know if you've heard of Nick Bostrom, quite a prominent sort of person in the field. And he yet again defines intelligence as it, to repeat myself, when the system is doing something at least as good or better as the human. And that can make us ask, is Watson an intelligence when it analyzes airplanes? I would definitely argue yes, if it can do it better than the engineers or a system to make it better. But however, is Siri an intelligence? I don't know about you, but I get quite irritated when I speak to Siri and I'm like, call my mother, and I'm like, yeah, I'm starting that song by Monster Magnet instead. And crash. So let's focus in on ANI. And well, going back to the hype curve, I think we are today in a place where the hype is way greater than the results as of now. And why is that? Well, yet again, the hype curve. We are in a place where media is very, very strongly hyping the concept of AI, and we're getting all of these images of what it should be, yet again. But I don't think that's the only answer. The other answer, going back to the hybrid, is that we are actually putting expectations on our systems which may be too great sometimes. So what I mean with that is often when I talk to people that are not necessarily from a technology background, and they're starting to talk about we are building systems to help us come to this conclusion. The conclusion that I want to reach is actually, well, often too big, I would say. So they build a system that is trying to do too much. Going back to the letters, A and I, they are not really focused on the narrowness anymore. And by going away from the narrowness, they are also sacrificing the intelligence. So how can we actually survive this hype and start to build something that's truly useful? That's what I want to touch upon. with some examples from what we're doing as well. So I think it's very useful to take a step back then and actually look within the corporation, okay, what do we have? Going back to data and tools. A typical tool could be Watson. A typical data could be a lot of finance data within Nordnet. If we start to look at the data, how unique is it actually? Uniqueness, I would say, is especially interesting when it comes to competitive advantage compared to other companies. Can we do something which these competitors haven't done before? Secondly, quality. For example, when we analyze fund data, we have a surprisingly big problem with faulty data. And that is something that obviously can lead to a lot of challenges if the system doesn't understand or has some way to sort of flag what is faulty and what is not. Something to be aware of. Quantity, quite obviously. I guess, well, anyone that has studied even an inch of statistics here know that it's too easy to draw conclusions from too small data sets. And most interesting, I would say, actual purposefulness. Favorite example, we mentioned hedge funds earlier. I think we've seen too many examples historically where a group of clever people, but perhaps without any fundamental understanding for finance, starts to look at historical data, looking to, well, let's just say development in price. And they're saying that, oh, we are building this algorithm and we've backtested it for 15 years, looking at all the past development in valuations of this, whatever, commodity. And therefore, we can predict what will happen in the future. And then they sort of forget that, oh, wait, shit, past performance is not an indication of future performance. So you're building an algorithm which is using data which is not actually fit for the purpose. And obviously, it will yield results which are not necessarily useful, but an even bigger problem is that you won't know that until 10 years later as well, when all your investors have lost their money. So uniqueness, quality, quantity, and actual purposefulness. Within your company, do you have data which sort of fulfills all of these, at least a hygiene level, and hopefully quite a lot? And the second one, tools, going back to Watson. Do we have access to tools, or do we have the ability to build the tools that will actually make sense of this data? And when I'm saying make sense, I'll yet again mean to go back to intelligence. Can we actually do something that is better than, or at least as good than what a person can do? And when many people, when a company does this and they start to look at this, they often realize, quite unfortunately, that this AI has quite little I in it. But yet again, the point that I want to push and yet again tackle is that's often because we ask you to do too much. So what is the solution here? I would say that the solution is actually to add more actual I to it. And that is going back to a hybrid, that is going back to having a system that actually augments a team of traders or a team of flight technicians to make better conclusions. But yet again, don't try to force the system to do it all for you. In essence, let it leave humans to the risk. And to actually take some example here. So we analyze about 3,600 funds daily. And well, to do that, I don't know, how many analysts would you actually need to have to do that?
I don't know.
Way too many.
Too many.
Yeah.
1 million.
Exactly. We are 7 people, as an example. Heavily weighted towards engineers, I should still say. So how do we actually analyze so many funds? Well, obviously, we build algorithms instead to track changes. Well, I wouldn't call that AI. To see how those changes perhaps affect the group of funds which this fund is a part of. To, for example, draw a conclusion, say, okay, what is a cheap fund within global index funds, or just global stocks, I should say, and what is a cheap fund within, say, Russian stocks? Those answers are completely different. So we employ systems to do some of those things, but we still don't let those systems. One question we get too often: oh, but won't this result in that faulty data I mentioned earlier, sometimes pushing faulty results out to 10,000 users? We passed 10,000 the other day, by the way, after 4 months of going live. But no, that's where the humans need to come in, because we see that these systems are not good enough to actually see which data that is faulty or which. We know that's a problem. But therefore, we can take a step back and make the system actually do all the suggestion of the conclusions, but then inject people and actually see, okay, is this actually true? Can we validate this? But therefore, we need to analyze, say, look at 5 funds or 10 funds per day rather than 3,600. To be honest, it's just efficiency. It's just technology. It's just doing what that Chinese company was it? We're not trying to eliminate the people in any way. I think that's highly unwise. Rather, let the computers focus on what they do well and insert people, yet again, to actually do the artificial intelligence parts of it, augmentation. And often when I say this, many people look at me like this. Oh, heresy, Jesus! We should get these systems to actually do the full Monty for us. But I really want to stress that we are not trying to take anything backwards here. We're actually trying to take it forward. By yet again going back to the bank example, how do a big bank actually achieve change within something that we call AI? Well, we start to focus on something very narrow, and there we look at how can we actually produce a usefulness now? How can we make something that produces useful results and therefore value today? And based on that, we as a small company, we can have way less people to do something that's normally quite big. That will give us more cost efficiency, it will give us persistence, it will give us time to iterate, both on these core but also additional fields that we want to augment with technology. And perhaps, just perhaps, that can give us the time to work towards a greater AI, and perhaps even in the future an AGI. Who knows? So the core point being, yet again, we want to avoid this. We want to avoid this whole partially media hype saying that no, everything is supposed to be AI and it will revolutionize the world. And I mean, many of these things are, well, systems could be useful to do them, but seriously, why? Why can't we instead focus down on actual usefulness, things that humans are a challenge to do, and instead aim to do certain things like this? A computer can drive better. A computer can clearly, every week, as it suggest music, which I find more interesting than my current music. Although I get way too much Finnish rap, I should say. I don't know why. I think I have some Darude song, Sandstorm or something, like forgotten playlist. And to way to control home and way to actually do investment, as an example. Let's focus on something smaller. Let's not all get into this media hype. Let's do something that's truly useful and creates value. And by doing that, we may actually just live through this draw that will come of this and produce something that's, yet again, truly useful. So keep narrow and make it intelligent. And that's it.
Yes. I'm interested to hear more about how you actually evaluate these investment funds. Is it purely on growth, or I mean, a fund is a very complex product, right? You have currency risk, you have fees for management, you have a lot of. I mean, it's one thing to manage an engine maintenance schedule, for example, that's quite binary.
Absolutely.
Whereas this is for me a fund. Okay, stock is one thing. But a fund, it also changes all the time. It depends on the investment strategy. And 3,600 funds, I mean, the amount of data you have must be truly massive.
We probably have, Sweden's largest database when it comes to fund data. However, to go back to your question, I mean, it's a big challenge to actually sift through what is useful about it, what is not useful. And you mentioned results as an example. And to be a bit provocative, especially in a room with probably quite a lot of finance people, one of the things we'll look the least at are results, historical results, because yet again, if we go back to fundamental research within finance, it shows that past performance is not an indication of future performance. And then rather, what is an indication of future performance? To the three things we look primarily at, this differs a bit, I should say, between different categories, fund categories. But the three things we look the most at is price, differentiation, not differentiation, basically risk, how you spread out your risks, diversification. And thirdly, the ability to track a market which you are invested in, which also is a proxy of diversification. So those are three main. And under that, we have 12 additional factors, which they point at a few different things, but I would say the main thing is actually hidden risks. Risks which are harder to just price in. Risks which are not necessarily visible in just historical volatility. It can often be things like which legal framework are you actually under? How good is the visibility into this fund? Things like that. So all in all, 15 different variables were the three biggest ones that I mentioned. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Oh, one more question, but have it a little bit short because we're running out of time.
How to find narrow use cases. For example, you can share your story, how to say that this is the use case that we should catch on and it's worth building. And maybe if you want to do it in future, how you will find it again, that this can be done by AI in very lean way.
So it's your question, how do you find a narrow use case? I would actually go back to not at all focus on AI, but just focus on the use case to start with. I think the main problem within entrepreneurship, I would say, is not to find a narrow use case, but which is to find a true use case at all. I mean, how do you build something that actually creates value to a user? 90% of businesses don't or do it too weakly. So instead, start by finding things or areas where you feel that you can develop, let's say, a value that is at least 10 times as good as the current incumbents. And if you do that, then see, okay, is it narrow? Does it make sense to apply AI, broadly speaking, to it? So work in that direction instead.
So maybe I could change it for narrow problem. I didn't mean AI at all. So how you will find a narrow problem that is growing in value or the pain in the neck of the customers?
So you're basically more talking about ideation in general. How do you come up with an idea which is narrow problem enough? Or
Yes, maybe. How do you start it to say that this is the thing that we can focus on?
Oh yeah, got it. To be honest, I think I started by saying short about that. We were very dissatisfied customers, a few of us, and to be honest, we didn't start by looking at is this narrow enough. We just started by looking at this is a serious problem, and we're pissed as hell with our big banks. And then we start to look at, okay, what does actually produce a true value with this? Going back to your question. And can we get access to that data for it? Okay, and then, given that we can get access to the data, well, we are engineers, we think we can deliver tools enough that are interesting enough on that topic. I'm yet again not sure, to be honest, if I'm answering your question.
But maybe you can
yeah, we can take that later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk about why security is so important with AI and big data.
Should I just, I'm Elise Ravel, I'm the founder and inventor. I just want to go back to IBM and to Lars Hamberg with 6. We've been around the world, also invited by IBM last year in Las Vegas and other big companies. And to 6, we have a connection in the past, and not concerning this company, it's another company that I have. But we were asking how much parallel computers do you really have to connect for us? And he answered, not he, but in your colleague, we have 64,000 kernels to provide you. Thank you, I said. Just to recall something to the previous talkers. Please, take it away, Anna.
Take it away.
Yeah.
Is everybody awake?
Yes.
Yes, I'm still awake. It's quite warm here. Securing the future, we're talking about. I want to start asking you, why is it important? Why is secure data important? Any hands up?
Nobody.
Nobody. What about protecting communication? Could that be something important? Protecting transactions. Important. quite important.
To that, we can add a little bit that we have a UK report that recently, because I have my project in an R&D lab in London, so I just had to take it up in quite another way. That is actually over 2 million individual accounts, bank accounts, that is frauded with real money, actually, in the past year. So the UK have committed to put 1.9 billion pounds to try to solve this problem. Just to give you a figure.
Obviously, it's a problem, and as we have more transactions, the problem might be bigger. Protecting personal integrity. As we communicate, as IoT communicates with personal data, we would like that to be protected. So this is why securing is one of the most important things. We need to solve the NP hard problem.
I'll make a comment. Yes.
Yes, please.
NP hard problem is a very, very nasty problem because you have NP and you have equal or non-equal to P. And the easiest part is, of course, to solve the NP part, because when you see a result, like in AI, you see the result you assume is correct from the computer, artificial intelligence. But how to come there to get this right answer? If you go out of the domain, you don't get any answer because they don't know how to make it. We can define it as a P problem. You don't know, or if you're doing Sudoku, you will not see how to solve the Sudoku while you're doing. That's a P problem. And when you see the result of the Sudoku, and then you see it's correct, then it's an MP problem. So that's a distinctive way, because that's coming in when you are having big data, unsorted data, for instance, to solve. So that's one of the problems that also includes in AI, mathematically. Explain.
Okay, a little bit about the company. The company Calitech, it was established in 2010 by Elise, founder and inventor of the method. And she's got 7 patents in kinds of countries. Covers about 80% of the population of the world. So since it's a totally new method, we've got patent for it.
And it's also, you will see it include the 4 main areas today: AI, IoT, blockchain, and cloud for banking, for instance. So it's covering. But I didn't know the word AI or blockchain. I called it node to multi-node, the patent. So this was really many years ago. So there is. Later on, I realized, oh, okay, I invented that one too. Oh, this was nice. Okay.
So what is our new method? Well, we say it's a new revolutionary way to transfer, encrypt, secure communication without keys. And what do we mean by keys? Well, as we look at what's being used today, it's the PKI solutions with shared secrets, keys. And if you go the history.
Do you want to take this?
Yeah, start by 2002.
Yeah, okay. It's 2002. I started when I was in Uppsala University to make the algorithm for prime numbers, and that was also the start to beginning to build the quantum computer. So the prime numbers today on an ordinary PC, I can produce 70.4 million prime numbers like this. And it's very exciting, of course, for me, because I've been excited, but all the other in the society are deadly scared, because that also resolves all the secret keys that you use prime numbers to. But I'm on the good side, and therefore I had to go to be a hacker also. So I'm also a hacker. But we, of course, we have the network of National Fraud Center, like Jan Olsson. We have the FBI, for instance, and we have Interpol. Of course, they are looking into me and say, "What are you doing here?" Yeah, I'm fine. So that's the way. 2002 it started.
So then, when you realized that you can be a kind of quantum computer, taking all these prime numbers in your little computer with not very much power.
250. 56. 256.
Then you realized that having a method with prime numbers, that's not a good idea. You have to do something else.
And then the idea came out to do it without keys. And that is a very complicated kind of to say in the mind mentally, that you don't have to have any kind of keys, but you have a more secure way to communicate. And they just say, aha, what do you really mean? So that's what they're all about, to make the change mentally changing.
We forgot the entrance. Normally we have keys and we just throw them away to wake everybody in the room up to say we don't have keys. We threw the keys away. The method also enables secure registration, authentication and verification of both physical person, me, my device and the server, each session. And that's need a party when there's a node-to-node or a node-to-multi-node communication, know the other's all. And the communication mutates every millisecond, and this makes it secure against all known attacks and man-in-the-middle attacks.
That we got the proof and the scientific paper 2013 in Regensburg in Germany with my research team with PhD Dimitri Simos. He is PhD in cryptography, and Alexander Hudik he has a master in security. First, they were very skeptic. These are scientific people. They are you really sure? And how do you do this? But after a while, Dimitri understood the method and actually pinpointed out that this was really possible to do a secure solution without keys. We had the zero knowledge protocol before of course, from Shamir, that already did the RSA method. So he said it's possible. He really published that one. So, and then Dimitri also kind of understood that this was, and the outcome and the proof was that we don't have any known hacker method today that can reach this method in the patent if it's properly implemented, of course. And there is no middleman attacks possible either. You don't know if there is a random part which makes a mutation every millisecond or nanosecond. You don't have the time, and then you have also maybe the process file protected via AS5256. You need to reach both of them in a millisecond in real time, and that's not possible to do both. So we were winning the kind of explanation, and we just realized it was possible. in the scientific way.
And I try to explain this in a very, very easy way. We say, if we got a house and we got a locker on the door, and with this method we also have a fence that mutates every millisecond. And if you want to get into the house, you have to breach the fence and the locker on the door at the exact same time. So that's it. That's the simple explanation. And then how do you do it? Well, we cannot explain it all here, then you will fall asleep. But if we say that we have a process file that is randomly created in each node, and it's independent and autonomous from the other node. And this is what replaces the keys. So it's something completely new. And we look at the PPI solution that is used today. And we say this is a 50-year-old security method. If we describe it as an onion, then we have put layers on it to make it more secure with longer keys and elliptic curves and all kinds of stuff. But it's still a 50-year-old onion.
It's still a 50-year-old onion. Okay.
And what we say, it all get on the needle point for the algorithm for prime numbers. That's what it's all relying on, and that's not really stable. It also has got shared secrets. It's got time-limited certificates, and they never die.
Yeah.
No.
They live forever in the cyber world. I promise you.
And just handling all the certificates is very costly. So if you take this big amount of data, so what you have to do with the certificates, it's going to cost much. And there's no authentication on the server. Yeah, so if we look at the Kelesek method, it relies on a completely other stable ground. It's secure registration, authentication, and verification of both, as I said before, physical person, plus me, my device, and the server, every session. And neither party knows his own value or the other. So there's no shared secret. The communication sequence mutates every millisecond. That's the fence. And it is proved to be secure against all known attacks and manipulation. So we say the ASP of the Kelesek method is quantum computer safe. It's simple. It's easy to implement software. Very cost effective. No CAs needed. And it enables secure exchange and verification both physical person. Yes. As Elise told us before, the homework has been done. We have done scientific papers, and they have been looked into, and by a committee of 152 universities. And it got a rate 6 out of 7, and the other paper got 4 out of 5, and it was rated as ground. So just a quick, the mutating change every time. So if I send hello to David, it encrypts like this. I cannot pronounce it.
It starts here, hello, and ends here with the K. The first hello.
And then I do it again. I send exactly the same word, hello, again.
You get another one. Every millisecond, like this. This is slow, this is 1 second.
You cannot click that.
Yeah, I cannot click that one.
So that is fucking up. using today. Same because then static could be input. So what we have got is both node-to-node or node-to-network communication, and we have got pattern for secure node-to-multi-node communication. So if you think of blockchain, the technique behind Bitcoin, for example.
And this also is for the AI, if you have multi-nodes, you can also have the security so it doesn't go berserk, like you showed in the picture there, coming out on the door. It's also important so you can have different multi-nodes to the AI also, and node-to-node.
So where can you use this? Well, everywhere where anyone or anything communicates. So financial transaction, e-health, IoT, AI, blockchain, and it's easy to scale because business application uses.
And the new technology demands a new security, and we are claiming for that. And I think that is our last.
I think we
yeah, and we also been selected to be, before we got this great invitation, we didn't know that we are also finalists in the Ericsson Garage Challenge today. We're going to present the pitch at 5 o'clock. The questions.
Question. Anyone dare ask a question on this?
Somewhere there, I think there's a user. So
Yeah.
how does the communication with the encryption and the user work? Like, how is that link solved?
It's a setup that we call RAW. It's the first implementation that you need to be proven, because if you go into the network, we claim you as an intruder. So you are flagged like an intruder before we get all the information to the server. So you are really flagged like an intruder. So we are not going to get you through to the network or system before you have done that. All the sessions from that we were showing. So, and then you are approved, and then you also know who you are. And then FBI asked me, it was interview maybe, it doesn't matter. Then how do we get the bad guys or bad persons? It's not just, bad persons. And then they would just realize, we can get them, we don't have to listen to them. We don't have to listen to you. The communication, that you can have it as a solid integrity. Yes, I said, well, that's my aim, of course, because that's a really sensitive kind of communication that you want to have by yourself. But if it's a bad person, then they realize you get it with the person. Of course, then you have the whole network of the person straight away. So you don't need to listen to people anymore in this case with this method. You can have the integrity, and I think that's what we're aiming for, to communicate in a secure way. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Now we have Joachim. You want to like something? Joachim, help check for mortgages.
Correct.
Yes.
So, in the lack of oxygen here, please stand up 2 seconds. I will only bore you 10 more minutes. You can be focused. 11. So, my name is Joachim, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sthlm, world's first dev robot advisor. Can I ask you one question before beginning? How many of you know your interest rate on your mortgage? Some of you?
Yeah.
How many of you know how it stands in comparison with the lookalikes? 2, 3 people.
But I can do business.
Exactly. This is one thing we do at Booking. So we do a mortgage health check. Perfect. Yes, so we give you a personalized score on your mortgage based on 4 criteria. The interest rate, the debt, the amortization, and adjustment periods. Here is some views on the app right now, available in App Store and in Google Play in 3 weeks. So for those of you who have a mortgage in Sweden, please download the app. Absolutely. We are algorithmical native. Bufik was founded throughout an algorithm developed in conjunction with KTH. And me and Peter, both founders, had a major in financial mathematics and optimization. So Bufik is basically built up of 5 different algorithms right now. The original one, fixed and floating one, which me and Peter was developed during our thesis at KTH, together with a very famous professor in optimization, working with radiotherapy for brain tumors at Karolinska. And we have the amortization algorithm, the goal interest rate algorithm that make you sort of help you choose which goal rate you should have, a personalized interest rate. Not just a list rate or original rate, it's goal rate where actually based on lookalikes. We have the push notification algorithm and the Bufik score algorithm based on those 4 criteria as I just mentioned. I usually got the question, what's the differences between Bufik and other loan intermediaries like lenders, for example? Is the use different? I don't like to put us in this box, but if I have to do it, we can sort of have this slide. On the y-axis, we have types of loan issued. We have a mortgage and we have unsecured one. So for those of you live in Sweden, you know about those loan intermediaries. We have Mittbola and Lånbilder working in the mortgage field, and we have sort of other loan intermediaries working with unsecured loans. On the y-axis, we have the relationships. Most loan intermediaries has one-time relationship with the consumers. We have a long-term relationship like Tink. If you now change the x-axis to robot advice instead, we see that Tink move to the left side, and we stay at the upper right side. If we instead go leave intermediaries and only focus on robot advisors, we have this slide. This is a balance sheet for a private person. You have the asset side and you have the liability side. For average Swede, they have 20,000 kronor in total savings. And the average mortgage is 2 million Swedish kronor. That's 100 times more. So what you should focus on here is 100 times more important on the liability side, on the mortgage side. As you can see here, on the asset side, it's quite crowded, different of robot advisor, but we are the only one on the liability side. We have a strong market growth, been at the App Store for 5 weeks and accumulated 6,000 users right now. And we're growing 350 per day. We are very fortunate to have a very experienced board and advisors. We have Thomas Eriksson, Angerelius, Anna Stenberg, Jens Nilsson, and Anna Tonneryd. Just to mention one, Thomas Eriksson was the former CEO of Carnegie Investment Bank and also former CEO of Swedbank Group. But how do we make money? We offer the app for free for the mortgage holders. We have developed a platform called Bufik Mortgage Portfolio Management, based on 3 services. The BNP Insights will give banks and creditors knowledge about the market, strategy you can use it for strategy purpose, and data insights like aggregated totals, proportions, trends, and movements. And then we have BNP Market Growth that can attract consumers in a traditional intermediary way But also a new feature, segmentation. Banks can segment customers and choose target groups that fits their risk profile portfolio. And use the specific and well-defined characteristics as we have in our mortgage portfolio at Bofink. And by this, lower the customer acquisition cost for the banks. And last but not least, we have extended retention platform that makes banks sort of lower the churn rate. So you can know about all existing customers who are considering to change in bank using our app, considering to change in bank. You can sort of, for example, help the Swedish Handelsbanken to cash their consumer back, to build up the trust again. There's a possibility to act proactively and outreachable and increase the retention rate. Here is a sneak peek on the inside. So we see the market split here. See Handelsbanken leading. Here is how big the mortgages are right now in our stock. I bet the economists here know about how you should read this box diagram, right? 70% here and 90% on the line. Here's the LTV, the debt ratio. And here is the interest rate. Could no one in this room tell me why we see a sort of normal distribution here with expectation value around 1.5, but the outlier here at 2%?
It's the list price, right?
Correct. People who don't agree.
And who are the other unlucky persons who are actually higher than the list price?
Here you mean?
Yeah.
This could, for example, be one with low credit credibility,
Aha.
like Blue Step or. And here's the credit rate and our grade, which we give the customers. So sneak peek. If you are interested and need to know more about this platform, please don't hesitate to ask me questions after the presentation. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
I have one question. You said that the other robo-advisors are mortgage one-timers, whereas you are long-term. So how do you think? I mean, should you? This one. So how will you stay connected with the customer, and how will you engage the customer when?
We use a lot gamification in the app, and we also use push notification. I mean, it could be, for example, that the bank increased the interest rate without telling you, and then we tell you that they do. It can, for example, be like the interest rate going up, and you should probably changing adjustment period. Then we can tell you that by push notification. We try to sort of use gamification to get the customer engaged in that.
And also, if something happens in my life, if I suddenly change the scoring, I don't know how you calculate it, will you let me know and do a new re-evaluation?
Yeah, that's right.
Just maybe the push.
Do you use a standard UC, or do you use something? Do you have your own algorithm for risk?
Yeah, the own algorithm.
Or do you use UC?
But do you mean the distribution or? A UC? No. Exactly. We are in negotiation with them actually, but I mean, they sort of look at 1 year before how much you have made 1 year before, right? We look at daily data, what you actually spend today. Since we use the bank ID and connect, and you just catch the data from the banks, so it takes basically 20 seconds to do a health check on your mortgage.
But for the banks, is that as relevant as data from UC?
Yeah, I mean, they are owner of UC, right? So that's one thing that that's a problem for us. But I think they sort of understand that. I mean, hey, we have to come up with something better than UC, right? But we are in negotiating with UC.
What's your revenue model?
As I mentioned, this is our revenue model. So we sell this to creditors and banks. This platform.
And it works out?
We have been up for 1 month, so we'll see.
So when will you suggest to your users to borrow more money and put it in the RoboSave platform?
Exactly. I don't know if I can tell it, but we are in a negotiation with, for example. Yeah. So definitely, I mean, in the amortization case, for example, could be like you amortize too much, right? And they could put it on RoboSave instead, right?
Any questions from the panel? Is this an example of a small business case to start with AI? And
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. But I was wondering, I mean, what kind of, maybe you showed that, do you have some kind of distribution of, time to maturity or the length of the loans and stuff like that? Yeah, you can actually visualize how that is changing over time.
Exactly. That was the original algorithm we developed together with the professor I mentioned before. So we use scenario analysis and lots of probability theory to actually calculate. I think it's 33 million of different cases just to 1 year ahead. So it's extremely hard to, I mean, a salesperson and a bank to say, you're going to choose this proportion on fixed rate and this on floating rate. It's impossible. You have to calculate it using algorithms.
And a follow-up question. Since you're an expert in this field, I guess you know a lot about bubble theory and how localized bubbles and what happens in particularly in property market that are marginally priced, and where people borrow on the margin and where the price is set by the marginal buyer. So according to your view here, do we have a bubble or do we have local bubbles?
It's a hard question. It's not, the bubble thing is not my field, but the mortgage thing is my field. Just speaking myself, not for Bofink. I don't think I think we have I mean, we get setting the price in Sweden now, coming up with a new amortization requirement from the FD and stuff like that, making not so many people afford to buy larger apartments at least. Maybe we can see an increase in smaller apartments, but a setting about more.
What tech do you run this on? What platform do you use?
Do you mean code-based? Or?
Yeah, code-based.
Exactly. We use, Ruby on Rails. Yeah. So.
And you run it off of which?
From the beginning it was MATLAB.
Okay.
Then Python and then Ruby. Yeah.
Great. No, very impressive.
More questions?
I'm all good. He stole mine.
Impressed. Any other questions from the audience? Actually, either of these guys from the panel first.
Talk interest rates in general. I have this theory that it's pretty much controlled by China because it's a race between countries. Whereas if we don't, it's about risk, right? How low interest rate that the national banks can go. Like how low are you willing to go? Then the United States need to follow what China does. So they also need to lower their interest rate, which makes that Sweden, the Riksbank, can lower their rates. And do you see that, like, this race, is that what's fundamentally driving the low interest rates? Or why do you see that this is, I mean, it's crazy, right? We're making an amazing bubble. And what happens if we don't take these risks? Where is this race going to end? And do you believe there is this race?
Nobody knows. I mean, it's the biggest, it's the $1,000 trillion question, because we've never seen this anywhere in history.
Yeah.
But I don't know about China specifically, but I mean in terms of sustained period of extremely cheap credit and asset prices going up. So now it starts to look like what we saw in 2008 and 2009 was just a blip on the curve.
Okay. super interesting having you all here. So I really hope that we do this Sapphire Day next year again. Thank you very much. Thank you.